What's up, fisher people? I am tying some spinner rigs here to get ready for the upcoming season, and I thought I would do a little demonstration as well as talk about spinner rigs, tackle, gear. If you stick around towards the end of the video, I'm gonna also tell you the number one thing that I learned last year that I would consider my best fishing tip to help you and me catch more fish. So let's get into this. First of all, for those of you not familiar with a spinner rig setup, and calling it spinner rig is a bit of a misnomer, I suppose. It's probably more accurately just called a live bait rig. I happen to plan on putting spinners on this one. As you can see by that white quick change clevis there, which gives me the ability to swap spinners, but you can do these a number of different ways. I'm gonna go off of what I'm using, and then I'm also gonna describe what you could do differently. For line, I am using 14-pound monofilament line. You don't necessarily have to go that heavy, but fishing out on Sakakawea, first of all, there's some bigger walleyes. Second of all, you oftentimes run into a lot of pike. Now, I've tried using fluorocarbon line as well, which is a little more abrasion resistant. It helps with the pike to some extent. However, fluorocarbon also sinks more and mono tends to be more buoyant. And I was having more issues with the fluorocarbon sinking, dragging on the bottom and getting snagged more often. So I went with the mono, and that's what I tend to use. The fluorocarbon can work as well. The other thing you can think about is if the fluoro is gonna sink, the bigger blade you have on there and the faster you're moving through the water helps to provide lift to your bait. So if you're using fluorocarbon, you might want to consider that to try to keep it off the bottom more if that's your goal. In terms of the leader line, I typically do about 5, almost a wingspan, so about 5 feet is my kind of average standard, my average size of a snell, they call it. You can go shorter sometimes to save some line. If the fish are a little more finicky, you can also go longer to get more space between that and the bottom bouncer or whatever weight you're using to drag it through the water. Again, on Sakakawea, the water clarity is usually fairly dingy and we don't tend to have a lot of problems with that. So I don't worry about leader length too often, but it can make a difference on something to pay attention to. After the leader, you always want to put a few beads, mostly as spacers, to provide space so that when the blade spins, it doesn't spin and hit the hook or hit the bait. They're functional, but they can also, have different colors. They can have different shapes. They can have different sizes. They can sparkle, they can do all kinds of different things. So you have different options to add something to your presentation. If there's a particular color you like, you can use that color of beads as well if you think that's gonna help. In terms of the spinners, like I said, you can have the quick change clevis on there, but the other thing you can do is I tied a few of these up here with, you can see this, these little prop rigs. So this you can't change after the fact, but it's just a little propeller that sits in front and spins. So it's a little more subtle. It doesn't have as much thump in the water as a spinner blade would. So typically very early in the season, once we're jig fishing, and then if we start to move into live bait rigging, we might not use a spinner at all to start with, a little more subtle. Then we might graduate to these, and then we might graduate to smaller standard blades, and then we might graduate to fatter blades that really provide some thump. So that's kind of the progression. Then in terms of hooks, first of all, you obviously need one hook to catch a fish, but sometimes you can use 2. So again, as I was showing you this one, this is what you would call a night crawler harness. Night crawlers are about the only bait that you would use 2 hooks for, and you wind up putting the nose of the crawler here, the middle here, and having a little bit dangle off the back. You can also use a single hook for night crawlers though as well, and use a half crawler. I've done that plenty of times. There are also things called slow death hooks, which have a little angle to it, which provides a little bit of twirl through the water if you hook half of a night crawler properly by threading it on there. This is actually technically a death roll hook, but it's got a little bit of a different kink there, which provides some spiral through the water. If you're using minnows, obviously you're gonna do 1 hook. If you're rigging like big chubs or something, you might have a double setup, but typically you're gonna put like a stinger hook or something in the back, maybe even a treble or something like that, as opposed to that harness with the night crawlers. In terms of size, I usually use a size 2 hook. That's what all of these are right here. You could potentially go a little smaller than that. I know a lot of people use like 4s, size 4 or something like that. But you do wanna make sure though, the shape of the hook, I'm using octopus hooks here, and the way that this holds, the line goes straighter through because of the eyelet being bent. So the line is straighter through and truer to the shank of the hook, which gets things very in line as you're pulling it through the water and in terms of setting the hook on a fish. And now I think we're just gonna go through the process and actually build one of these things to show you how it's done start to finish. And you're not gonna see my face right now because you see enough of that in most of the other videos. What you need to see is right down here. So I got my 2 hooks. We're gonna do a night crawler harness for the most complete setup. We got a few beads, we got a spinner. I got 2 different colors of hooks. I'm gonna get fancy here. I'm gonna put, oh, there go the beads. Son of a gun. I'm gonna put the first hook right here. So you slide it through there, through that eyelet, right? So you got that, and then basically you just wrap it around that shank, say 5 times. You get it nice and snug. So now you got a bunch of curls around there, and then you go back through that eyelet the opposite way. And this would probably be easier to see if I use like some high-vis colored line or something. Maybe a thought for another day. But once you get that through there, you just snug it nice and tight, and sometimes that line's gonna try to twist on you. So you just gotta kind of prop that a little straighter, and it just pulls right through there like that. Now, this is the interesting part where you're gonna thread the other hook on a different way, because you want it to thread on the way it's gonna sit. So you get the front of the line here, and it's like you're gonna cut in backwards this time, because that's how you want it to end up by the other hook, right? Here, so see how that lines up now? Just like that, and now you do the same thing from that point here, where you wrap it around that shank about 5 times, nice and snug. And there are other ways to tie knots for sure. I'm sure other people watching this probably know different knots. That's great. I'm just trying to make sure that what I'm doing is keeping everything as true as it can down the shank of that hook, so that all the pull of momentum is all going totally parallel to the shank of the hook like that. So now, once you get the hooks on there, then you take your beads of choice and just slide those on the line, and you're just kind of stacking it like a sandwich at this point, right? So you see how the beads sit on right ahead of there? And then you got your quick change clevis, which slides on, and you want to make sure that it slides on that away, so the spinner sits right in there like that. You don't want that thing upside down. And that stacks right on top of everything like so. And then there's different ways to do this knot, because this is where you're gonna attach it to the bottom bouncer, which typically is just a big snap swivel on the end. I usually do a loop like that. Then you kind of double it up on itself, and then just tie an overhand knot with it and pull it through like that. And then I do the same thing right over top of the previous knot just to reinforce it. I feel like my voice sounds super deep right now. Maybe that's just me, or maybe I'm being too monotone. But there's your loop. And now this can wrap around this guy, so that you got a ton of these ready to go for the season. Before I do that, I did promise to show you how that spinner blade's gonna clip onto this clevis, just like that, so that when this is in the water, that spinner blade will spin right around as it pulls through the water this direction, and hopefully attracts yourself a nice, juicy walleye. Okay, thanks for sitting through the entire video. Now you get to hear this big revelation that I had for this year, the best tip that I learned. A lot of this came from watching underwater footage, which is a lot more common now, especially on YouTube and stuff like that, by watching underwater cameras for ice fishing. And I've also seen a lot of guys put a camera like on the leader of a trolling line or something like that, so that you can watch the fish follow the line. And it's just fascinating to see what they do ice fishing wise. If somebody's jigging something, that the fish will just kind of like, they'll know that something's there and they'll just kind of act like they don't and just circle it a number of times and kind of around the perimeter as if they're stalking it. And then sometimes they might just come up to it and kind of nose it and push it. And then they start to raise it up, sometimes you'll see these fish almost get vertical underneath it before they come up and bite it. Sometimes they'll come up like this and then kind of nose down on it. But the point being, like, you'll notice that a fish may be around a bait and kind of curious, but not really doing anything. And all of a sudden, the fisherman changes their presentation. They get poppier with it, or they start to raise it slowly. Something changes in the fish. You can see the change in its temperament, and they get excited and all of a sudden hit it. Same thing with trolling. You might troll through, say, 30 different fish in a few minutes, and 25 of them couldn't care less. A few of them might follow it and then leave. One of them might swipe at it and miss. One of them might swipe and bump it but not get it. And then finally a fish will grab it. You might be pulling through more fish than you realize. And the point of all of this is basically like, change something up in your presentation, especially if you know you're around fish and you're not getting bit. Try to go faster, try to go slower. If you're trolling, pump the rod once in a while. Try to get the bait to speed up and then fall back. I've seen a lot of times, and I've had a lot of times in my personal experience, where we'll be moving at a certain pace trolling and we decide to pick up and leave. We're gonna get out of this spot. And I start reeling in my line, so now it's moving faster, right? And as soon as I start reeling, bam, it gets hit by a fish, because all of a sudden a fish was probably following it and then it sped up and it's like, oh crap, that thing's gonna get away. I gotta get that bait. Or sometimes you be trolling and you start to make a turn and the outside bait gets hit because it's going faster, or the inside bait gets hit because all of a sudden it slows down and hangs. So maybe you have that case where a fish is following a bait and then the bait just kind of hangs in its face and it reacts and just grabs it because it's about to get smacked in the face. The tip, to be summed up, is basically always act as if there is a fish on your line right now and you got to figure out what you got to do to get it to bite. Whether it's pumping a bait when you're trolling, or changing up your jigging cadence, getting slower, getting faster, bigger sweeps, smaller jigs, whatever it is, change things up, change your bait up, change the size of your bait, but always act as if there's a fish on it and you got to figure out what you got to do to get bit, as opposed to just driving through fish and seeing a bunch of fish on your depth finder and going, they just must not be hungry today. Challenge yourself a little more to figure out what will make them bite, and I guarantee that'll wind up getting more fish in the boat, and it'll probably keep you engaged more because you're thinking about other things you can do instead of just kind of dragging through the day the same way your bait's dragging through the water, right? So anyway, that's that. If you liked the video, please remember, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Apparently you can ring the bell if you want notifications, if that's your sort of thing too. But that would do a lot to help support my channel, and it helps support my business, and to get other people to know about what it is I do, so that maybe they come watch, maybe they come take a fishing trip. So I would appreciate that. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.